Hello, my friends, welcome back. I am so glad you are here with me today. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Let go of the room you are sitting in. Let go of the traffic outside, the notifications on your phone, the worries of the modern world. We are going to drift away from all of that. We are going back, way back. We are traveling to a time before the history books began. A time before the maps were drawn, a time before the great flood washed the world clean. This is the era of the antediluvians, the world of Genesis chapter 6. It is a world that feels like a dream to us now. The Bible tells us that in those days, people lived for hundreds of years. Imagine that. Imagine a life that spans 9 centuries. You would have time to master every art, to learn every language, to build cities that touched the clouds. The earth was different then. Some say it was surrounded by a canopy of water, a greenhouse effect that made everything lush, vibrant, and gigantic. The air was richer, the fruits were sweeter, and the veil between the physical world and the spiritual world, well, it was much, much thinner. Today we are going to tell a story that has haunted humanity for thousands of years. It is not just a story about sin. It is a tragedy. It is a love story twisted into a nightmare. It is the story of the Watchers, the angels who looked down from their stations in the sky and fell, not because of pride, like Lucifer, but because of desire. They fell because they saw something in us, in humanity, that they could not resist. This is part 1, the view from the high places. Let us try to inhabit the mind of an angel. The ancient texts, like the book of Enoch, which expands on the Genesis narrative, call them the Grigori, the Watchers. Their job was simple. They were the sentinels of the cosmos. They were assigned to watch over the developing creation of God. They were beings of pure spirit, woven from fire and light. They did not sleep. They did not hunger. They did not age. They existed in a state of constant burning awareness. Imagine them hovering in the invisible dimensions, looking down at the earth. From their vantage point, the earth was a jewel. They saw the rivers of Eden branching out. They saw the first cities of men, Eridu, Enoch, rising from the dust. They watched humanity struggle and learn and grow. But there was a leader among them. The texts name him Shemayaza, and there were others, Azazel, Sarael, Barakiel. These were high-ranking princes of heaven, and as they watched, something began to shift in their perception. You see, angels are perfect. They are static. They do not change. They are created in a state of completion. But humans are messy. We are fragile. We bleed. We cry. We grow old and we die. But in that fragility, there is a strange, aching beauty that perhaps the angels did not possess. The Watchers began to focus their gaze. They stopped looking at the architecture of the cities or the agriculture of the fields. They began to look at the people. Specifically, they began to look at the daughters of men. Genesis 6:2 says, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair." That word, fair. It sounds so simple, but in the Hebrew context, it implies a captivating, almost hypnotic beauty. Imagine Shemiyaza, this great angelic prince, drifting invisibly through a marketplace in an ancient city. He sees a woman. Let's imagine her name is Nama. She is carrying a jar of water from the well. The sun is setting, casting a golden light over her skin. She laughs at something a child says. She brushes a strand of hair from her face. To an angel, who has lived for eons in the cold perfection of space, this burst of life is intoxicating. He sees the flush of blood in her cheeks. He hears the beat of her heart. He senses the warmth of her body. He sees the capacity for passion, for family, for connection. Things that angels in their solitary service do not experience. They began to covet. It started as curiosity. Then it became fascination, and finally it turned into an obsession. They would whisper to one another in the high realms. "Did you see her? Did you see how she danced at the festival? Did you see the fire in her eyes?" The text implies a long period of observation. This wasn't a sudden impulse. This was a slow burn. It was a gradual dissatisfaction with their own existence. They began to resent their spiritual nature. Why should they be made of wind and fire, unable to touch, unable to feel, while these lesser creatures of dust got to experience the profound ecstasies of physical life? They wanted to be real. They wanted to be solid. They wanted to be human. And so the desire hardened into a plan. The leader, Shemayaza, knew the cost. He was not a fool. He knew the laws of the Most High. He knew that the boundary between heaven and earth was sacred. To cross it, to clothe oneself in flesh and cohabit with a human, was treason. It was a violation of the cosmic order. It meant abandoning their post. It meant there could be no return. But the pull was too strong. The lust for the daughters of men had become a gravity they could not escape. I want you to picture the scene described in the ancient traditions. They decided to meet. They chose a place far from the settlements of men, a high place where the air was thin and cold. They chose the summit of Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon still stands today, on the border of Syria and Lebanon. Its peaks are often covered in snow. It is a majestic, imposing mountain. The name Hermon itself comes from a root word, meaning devoted to destruction, or banned. A fitting place for what was about to happen. 200 of them descended. 200 shining, glorious, terrifying beings. They landed on the peak, their light perhaps dimming, as they prepared to make a pact that would shake the foundations of the world. Shemayaza stood before them. He looked at his brethren. He saw the same hunger in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. But he also saw fear. They knew that God was watching. They knew the judgment would be severe. Shemayaza spoke. His voice must have sounded like the cracking of a glacier. He said to them, "I fear that you will not want to do this deed, and I alone shall be guilty of a great sin." He was afraid they would back out at the last minute, leaving him to face the wrath of God alone. He needed accomplices. He needed a brotherhood of guilt. And so, they answered him. They didn't just agree. They bound themselves with a curse. They swore an oath. "We will not turn back," they said. "We will do this thing. We will take what we desire." They swore by the mountain. They swore by the stars they were abandoning. They locked arms and sealed their fate. This moment on Mount Hermon is one of the darkest turning points in spiritual history. It was the moment the guardians became the invaders. It was the moment love was perverted into lust, and duty was traded for desire. They looked down from the snowy peaks of Hermon toward the valleys below, where the unsuspecting villages slept. They saw the cooking fires flickering like tiny stars. They knew the women were there. And then they began their descent. But my friends, the story is only just beginning. What happens when an angel takes on a human form? How did they approach these women? And what forbidden knowledge did they bring with them that would corrupt the heart of mankind forever? We will discover the terrifying answer to these questions as we continue our journey. We are standing at the foot of Mount Hermon, watching the shadows lengthen. The watchers are coming down to hear how they infiltrated humanity and the dark secrets they taught to our ancestors. Please stay tuned for Part 2, The Forbidden Gifts. I am glad you are still with me. The fire is crackling, the night is dark, and we are standing at the precipice of history's most forbidden event. 200 watchers, standing on the summit of Mount Hermon. They had sworn their oath. They had cut their ties with heaven, and now they began to walk down the mountain. I want you to imagine the scene in the valley below. It is the days of Jared, an ancestor of Noah. The civilization of man is simple, perhaps agrarian. People live by the rhythms of the sun and the moon. They are farmers, shepherds, musicians. Suddenly, strangers appear on the horizon. These were not ordinary travelers. Remember, these beings had just materialized into flesh, but they still carried the residue of their celestial glory. They were tall, likely taller than any man had ever seen. Their skin perhaps held a luminescence, a faint glow that defied the dust of the earth. Their eyes held the depth of the cosmos. When they walked into the village squares, the music stopped, the chatter died down. Even the animals must have fallen silent. Can you imagine the awe? The humans thought the gods themselves had come down to dwell with them, and in a way they had. But these were not benevolent gods. They were fugitives. They did not come with humility. They came with authority. They moved through the crowds, and they made their choices. The Bible says they took wives of all whom they chose. Let us look at that transaction. It was likely a mix of terror and seduction. For a young woman of that time to be chosen by one of these shining uns was perhaps seen as the ultimate honor. Who could refuse a being that looked like starlight carved into stone? They were irresistible. But this union was about more than just physical desire. It was a transaction. You see, the Watchers knew they had to offer something in return. They had to secure their place as the new masters of this world. And what do you give to a species that is limited, fragile, and hungry for power? You give them knowledge. The book of Enoch gives us chilling details about this. It tells us that the Watchers began to teach humanity secrets that were meant to remain hidden in heaven. This is the moment when human evolution took a dark, unnatural leap forward. Let us focus on one of the leaders, an angel named Azazel. The texts say Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates. Think about the implication of that. Before this, humanity likely fought with sticks, stones, or simple tools. Violence was personal and clumsy. But Azazel introduced the science of metallurgy. He taught them how to dig into the veins of the earth, how to extract the iron and the copper, how to heat it, beat it, and sharpen it. Imagine the first time a human man held a sword. The balance of it. The cold, lethal edge. It wasn't a tool for farming. It wasn't a tool for building. It was a tool designed for one purpose only: to kill efficiently. Azazel mechanized warfare. He turned killing into an art form. Suddenly, the tribes were not just neighbors, they were threats. The strong could dominate the weak, not just by muscle but by superior technology. The soil of the earth, which God had cursed only to produce thorns and thistles, began to drink a new kind of liquid, the blood of war, spilled in industrial quantities. But the corruption wasn't just for the men. The Watchers had gifts for the women too. The texts say they taught them about antimony, and how to beautify the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and coloring tinctures. You might ask, what is so wrong with makeup and jewelry? Is that really a sin? We have to look deeper. It wasn't about the decoration. It was about the intention. They taught the art of seduction. They taught humanity to value the external over the internal. They introduced vanity, competition, and the weaponization of beauty. The face was no longer just a reflection of the soul. It became a mask. Sexual attraction became a currency, a way to manipulate and control. And it went even deeper. Other Watchers taught sorcery. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Hermione taught the breaking of magic and sorcery. Barakijal taught astrology, the signs of the stars. They unlocked the occult. They showed humans how to manipulate the unseen forces of nature. Instead of praying to God for rain or healing, humans began to chant spells, mix potions, and looked to the stars for their destiny. They taught humanity that they could be their own gods, that they could control their reality if they just knew the right formula, the right ritual, the right sacrifice. It was the original lie of the serpent in the garden, amplified 1,000 times. You shall be as gods. The world began to change rapidly. The quiet, pastoral days were gone. The cities grew louder. The nights grew brighter with the fires of the forges. The air was thick with the smoke of smelting iron and the incense of strange rituals. The Watchers established themselves as kings, as sorcerer lords. They lived in palaces of stone. They had harems of the most beautiful women on earth. They were worshipped. They were adored. But there was a ticking clock. There was a biological time bomb waiting to go off. The women who had been taken by the Watchers, they were changing. Pregnancy is usually a time of joy, of anticipation. But for these women, it must have been a time of growing horror. As the months passed, their bellies grew larger than normal, much larger. They could feel the movement inside them, a strength that felt too powerful for a human infant. The villagers whispered. The mothers feared. The midwives were anxious. What happens when the immortal seed of an angel mixes with the mortal egg of a human? The DNA was not compatible. It was a violation of kind after kind. The boundaries of biology were being stretched to their breaking point. And then the day of delivery came. The screams were not just of labor pain, but of something else. Something unnatural was entering the world. The first generation of the hybrids was born. They did not cry like human babies. They did not look like human babies. They were large, voracious, and their eyes held the cold, detached hunger of a predator. This brings us to the edge of the next chapter of our nightmare. The Watchers thought they were building a dynasty. They thought they were creating a superior race. But they had actually birthed a plague. What happened when these children grew up? What happened when they became too big for the cradle, too big for the house, and too big for the world? Join me for part 3, where we will witness the rise of the monsters. We will see the earth tremble under the feet of the Nephilim, and we will watch as the dream of the Watchers turns into a blood-soaked reality. Stay close, my friends. The shadows are getting longer. Take a moment to center yourself, because where we are going now, it is not a place for the faint of heart. We have seen the descent of the angels. We have seen the corruption of human culture through forbidden technology and sorcery. But now, we must face the living, breathing consequence of that betrayal. The Bible uses a specific word for the offspring of the Watchers. It calls them the Nephilim. Translators have struggled with this word for centuries. The King James Version simply calls them giants, and while that is true, they were massive in stature. The word implies so much more. The root comes from the Hebrew word naphal, which means to fall. They were the fallen ones, the fellers, the ones who cause others to fall. I want you to imagine a child born in a village in ancient Mesopotamia. But this child grows faster than any human child. By the age of 5, he is looking down at his mother. By the age of 10, he towers over the strongest men in the tribe. His muscles are dense, like woven iron. His appetite is bottomless. At first, perhaps, the humans were proud of them. Imagine the prestige of having a son who was half god. A son who could lift a boulder with one hand, who could run faster than a gazelle, who could hunt lions as if they were rabbits. The Watchers likely looked at their sons with pride. They saw them as the new rulers of the earth, the men of renown, as Genesis calls them, heroes, kings. But as they grew, the pride turned to panic. The Book of Enoch gives us a terrifying description of this era. It says that the giants consumed all the acquisitions of men. Think about the economics of that. A village works all year to grow wheat and barley. They raise their cattle and sheep. And then the Nephilim come. They demand food. They eat in a day what a family would eat in a year. They are insatiable furnaces of energy. The humans worked harder. They farmed more. They gave everything they had to feed these demigods, hoping to appease them, hoping to stay on their good side. But it was never enough. And then the turning point came, the day the grain ran out, the day the livestock was gone. The ancient text says simply, "And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind." The protectors became the predators. I want you to visualize the horror of that reality. The very beings that humanity had worshipped, the sons of the gods, suddenly turned their eyes toward the humans, not as subjects, but as food. The scream of the earth began then. It was a time of absolute chaos. The Nephilim began to hunt humans. They treated villages like cattle pens. The reverence the humans had for the Watchers turned into a bitter, freezing terror. But the corruption didn't stop with cannibalism. The virus of rebellion spread to the animal kingdom. The texts tell us the Nephilim sinned against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. What does that mean? Many scholars believe this suggests a corruption of nature itself. Perhaps they practiced crossbreeding, genetic manipulation, trying to create other hybrid monstrosities. The very biological order that God had established, each according to its kind, was being shredded. The world was filled with chimeras, with beasts that were never meant to exist. Where were the Watchers while this was happening? They were watching, and perhaps for the first time, they felt the cold grip of regret. But it was not the regret of repentance. It was the regret of an arsonist who realizes the fire has burned down his own house. They could not control their children. The Nephilim were stronger than humans, and in their rage and hunger, they were uncontrollable. The Watchers had unleashed a force of nature that was tearing the world apart. The earth was filled with violence. That is what Genesis says. But the Hebrew word for violence here is Hamas. It means cruelty, injustice, a total lack of mercy. Imagine a world where might makes right. If you were strong, you took what you wanted. If you were weak, you died. There was no law. There was no judge. The only law was the hunger of the giants, the blood of humanity soaked into the ground. And the Bible says the earth itself cried out. It is a poetic image, but a powerful one. The soil, red with the blood of the innocent, was screaming to the Creator. How long? How long will you let this continue? Humanity was on the brink of extinction, not just physical extinction, but genetic extinction. The pure human bloodline, the DNA that God had designed, the vessel that was meant to one day hold the Spirit of God, was being polluted. If the Nephilim continued to breed, if they continued to spread, there would be no humans left. Only hybrids, only monsters. The plan of the enemy was clear. If he could corrupt the seed of the woman, the Messiah could never be born. If all flesh was corrupted, there would be no vessel for salvation. It looked like the end. The sun looked down on a world of smoke and screams. The Watchers sat on their thrones, surrounded by the carnage they had created, trapped in a nightmare of their own making. But my friends, the heavens were not empty. The silence of God was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of a judge who is gathering the evidence. It was the silence of a father whose heart is breaking, but whose resolve is hardening. Someone was watching back. High above the mountains of Hermon, high above the clouds, the eyes of the Lord were scanning the earth. He saw the wickedness. He saw that every intention of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. And this brings us to the most emotional, the most heartbreaking moment in the entire Old Testament. The moment God decided to hit the reset button. What happens when a creator has to destroy his own masterpiece to save it? How does God feel when he looks at the world and says, It is enough. We are going to step into the throne room of God in the next part. We are going to feel the grief of the Almighty. This concludes part 3. The earth is broken. The giants rule. Hope seems lost, but the story is about to pivot. The rain is coming. We have spent the last few minutes standing in the mud and the blood of the ancient world. We have seen the giants. We have heard the screams. It is a lot to take in. But now, I want you to change your perspective. Imagine we are rising up past the smoke of the burning cities, up past the snowy peak of Mount Hermon, where the oath was sworn, up past the clouds. We are entering the throne room of God. This is part 4, the grief of God and the ark of hope. There is a verse in Genesis chapter 6 that is, in my opinion, one of the most tragic verses in the entire Bible. It says, "And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart." We often think of God as a being of infinite power, unshakable, perhaps even distant. But the Hebrew word used here for grieved is atsab. It is a word that describes emotional pain. It means to be hurt, to be cut to the quick. It is the same word used to describe the pain of childbirth. Think about that. God looked down at his creation, this world he had spoken into existence, with such joy, and he felt physical pain. He did not just see rules being broken. He saw his children being destroyed. He saw the human DNA, the very blueprint he designed to carry his image, being twisted into something monstrous by the Watchers. He saw that the thoughts of man were evil continuously, not just occasionally. Continually. The infection was total. If you are a doctor and you see a patient with gangrene spreading up their leg, you know there is only one way to save the patient. You have to cut it off. You have to remove the rot before it reaches the heart. God's decision to send the flood was not an act of hate. It was an act of surgical salvation. He had to wash the world clean. He had to destroy the hybrid bodies of the Nephilim to stop the corruption. He had to imprison the rebellious Watchers. He said, "I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land." It sounds final. It sounds like the end of the story. But then, there is a but. Verse 8, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." Let's zoom in on this man, Noah. Who was he? In a world of giants, sorcerers, and warlords, Noah must have seemed terribly insignificant. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a warrior. He was a man of the soil. The Bible says Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Now that word blameless is fascinating. In the original Hebrew, it refers to physical perfection, like a lamb without a blemish. Many scholars believe this confirms that Noah's bloodline was pure. He was one of the few remaining humans whose genetics had not been corrupted by the Watchers. His family had not bowed to the fallen angels. They had kept their distance. God looked at Noah and saw a seed, a single viable seed in a field of weeds. And so God gave Noah a mission that must have sounded absolutely insane. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. I want you to picture the scene. Noah is living in a land that is likely far from the ocean. It has arguably never rained before, at least not in the torrential way we know. The earth was watered by mists from the ground, and God tells him to build a boat. Not just a boat, but a massive, rectangular box, a survival capsule. For 120 years, Noah built. Imagine the sound of his hammer ringing out across the valley. Clang, clang, clang. It was the only sound of sanity in a world gone mad. The giants must have laughed at him. The Watchers must have mocked him. "Look at the old fool," they would say, "building a ship on dry land. Does he not know we rule this world? Does he not know we are the gods now?" But Noah didn't stop. He cut the wood. He pitched it with tar. He built rooms. He gathered food. I like to think of Noah as the first preacher of righteousness. Every nail he drove was a sermon. Every plank he laid was a warning. He was telling the world, the party is over. The judgment is coming, return to the Creator. But no one listened. The allure of the watchers was too strong. The power of the Nephilim was too intoxicating. They looked at the sky and saw only blue. They looked at the earth and saw only their own dominion. They could not imagine a force that could overthrow them. And then, the work was done. The ark stood finished, a dark, imposing structure against the horizon. Then came the animals. Driven by a divine instinct, they came out of the forests and the fields. 2 by 2, 7 by 7. The birds filled the sky. The creeping things crawled across the sand. They marched into the ark while the world watched in stunned silence. Even the animals knew what was coming, while humanity remained blind. God spoke to Noah one last time. Go into the ark, you and all your household. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. 8 people, that was it. Out of the entire population of the ancient world, millions, perhaps billions of people, only 8 walked up that ramp. And then the Bible records a detail that gives me chills every time I read it. It says, "And the Lord shut him in." Noah didn't close the door. God did. It was the final seal. The time of grace had ended. The time of judgment had begun. Inside the ark it was dark. It smelled of animals and pitch. They waited. Outside, the mockery probably started again. See, nothing happened. The old man locked himself in a box. 1 day passed. Nothing. 2 days. Nothing. 6 days. The sun shone. The giants feasted. The watchers sat on their high seats. And then came the 7th day. The wind stopped. The birds stopped singing. The air pressure dropped so low your ears would pop. And then, the first drop fell. This brings us to the grand finale of our saga. The moment the ancient world was washed away. The moment the watchers were bound in chains of darkness. What happened when the fountains of the great deep burst forth? What happened to the giants when the water rose? And what is the lesson these fallen angels left for us today? Join me for the final chapter, Part 5, the Deluge and the Warning. We are almost there, my friends. The rain is beginning to fall. We are standing at the moment where history is cleaved in two. There is the world before the flood, and there is the world after. When the rain began, it was likely curiosity that struck the people first. Remember, the climate was stable. They had never seen water falling from the sky in violence. But this was not a spring shower. The Bible describes a cataclysm that is almost impossible to simulate in our minds. It says the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. This wasn't just rain. The crust of the earth cracked. Massive subterranean oceans, held under pressure for millennia, exploded upward. At the same time, the protective canopy above the atmosphere collapsed. The world was being attacked by water from above and from below. Imagine the panic. The Nephilim, those giants of renown, those invincible warriors, suddenly realized that their strength meant nothing against the wrath of God. You cannot fight a tsunami with a sword. You cannot intimidate a hurricane. I picture them running to the high ground. They climbed the tallest trees. They scrambled up the sides of the mountains. Perhaps they ran to the gates of their fathers, the watchers, screaming for help. Save us. Use your magic. Stop the water. But the watchers could do nothing. Their sorcery was powerless against the raw authority of the Creator. They stood and watched as their kingdom was washed away. The beautiful cities, the temples of idolatry, the forges of war, all of it was smashed into mud. The Bible says, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. The screams of the giants were silenced. The arrogance of the hybrid race was buried under miles of dark, churning water. The experiment was over. The slate was wiped clean. But what of the watchers themselves? They were spirits. They could not drown. So what happened to them? The New Testament in the book of Jude and 2 Peter gives us the chilling answer. It tells us that God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, specifically a place called Tartarus, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. Imagine the scene in the spiritual realm. As the water covered the earth, holy angels, the loyal ones who had stayed at their posts, descended. They were not there to fight. They were there to arrest. Shemayaza Azazel and the 200 who had rebelled were stripped of their authority. They were bound, not with physical iron, but with spiritual chains of darkness. They were dragged down, deep into the earth, into a prison of silence. They were forced to wait in the dark, to think about their choice, to remember the beauty of the women, the thrill of rebellion, and to realize that it cost them everything. They traded eternity for a moment, and now they had an eternity to regret it. Meanwhile, on the surface of the raging ocean, a single wooden box floated. Inside the ark, it was likely terrifying. The boat would have pitched and rolled. The noise of the storm outside must have been deafening, but inside, there was life. Noah and his family were safe, not because they were perfect, but because they trusted. They were the seed of the new world. In their DNA carried the potential for Abraham, for David, and eventually for Jesus. God had preserved the lineage. The plan of salvation was safe. For 150 days, the waters prevailed. And then, God remembered Noah. A wind blew over the earth. The waters subsided. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. When Noah finally opened the window and looked out, the world was silent. The giants were gone. The violence was gone. The evil was buried. He stepped out onto a scoured, clean earth. The first thing he did was not to build a house, but to build an altar. He worshipped, and God put a rainbow in the sky, a warrior's bow, hung up, facing away from the earth, signifying peace. So, my friends, why does this ancient story matter to us today? Why have I spent this time recounting the tale of the watchers? Because Jesus himself gave us a warning. He said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. He told us that history has a rhythm. The conditions that existed then, the obsession with the physical, the disregard for spiritual boundaries, the violence, the corruption of nature, these things would return. We live in a time where humanity is once again trying to become like gods. We are splitting the atom. We are rewriting the genetic code. We are merging with machines. We are fascinated by the occult and the supernatural, often without understanding the source. The story of the Watchers is a guardrail. It reminds us that there are boundaries we should not cross. It reminds us that intelligence without wisdom is dangerous. It reminds us that just because we can do something does not mean we should. But most importantly, it is a story about the severity and the mercy of God. He is severe enough to judge evil. He will not let corruption go on forever. He hears the cry of the oppressed, but he is also merciful enough to provide an ark. In Noah's day, the ark was made of wood and pitch. Today, we believe that ark is a person. It is the safety found in the redemption offered by God. The door is open. The invitation is there. Come inside, he says. Come out of the chaos. Come out of the storm. The Watchers made their choice. They chose the earth, and they lost heaven. Noah made his choice. He chose to trust God, even when it looked foolish, and he inherited the earth. As you go about your day, or as you lay your head down to sleep tonight, look at the world around you. It is beautiful. Yes, but it is also broken. Remember that you are not just a biological accident. You are part of a much larger story. You are caught in a cosmic conflict. But you are also the object of a divine love that was willing to reboot history just to save you. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for listening to the whispers of the ancient past. May you find your shelter. May you walk in wisdom, and may you always keep your eyes on the true light, not the fallen ones. This is your host, signing off. Peace be with you.